Hi everybody and welcome to this instalment of our short video series, Social Value Always Matters. I'm Rebecca, I'm the Membership and Networks Manager of Social Value International, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Simon Faivel. So Simon is the Director of Consulting at Social Ventures Australia. He's also the Chair of SIMNA and the Co-Chair of the SVI Board. So Simon, welcome and thanks so much for joining us. So to kick off with, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Of course. So I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. I have a background, first of all, in philosophy that led me to ask some questions about how I should live and what I should do, the fundamental questions. I found myself at Social Ventures Australia, a non-profit here in Australia. It's an intermediary, working sort of the juncture between business, government and social sector organisations, non-profits, and work in the consulting team and have been there for almost 13 years now, and also led the development of the Australian network, the Social Impact Measurement Network of Australia, SIMNA, co-chair of SVI. I'm very busy with all of that, plus I'm lucky to have a wife and 3 daughters here, trying to survive this new world order right now. So that's briefly who I am and how I fit into the picture.
Thanks, Simon. And I didn't know you had 3 daughters, so that's wonderful bit of info for me as well. Nice to get to know you a bit better. I've met times and I didn't know that, so that's nice to hear. But really the purpose of today's chat is for you to share with the people watching and listening how the issues that what the issues are that you're facing and how you're dealing with them, because we think that it is going to help others if we share our experience and what's going on. So I was wondering, how has the coronavirus affected your work, I guess, in 3 levels really, with Social Ventures Australia, SIMNA, and with SVI, and how have you responded to the crisis? So quite a big question there, really.
Yeah, and I've had a few different conversations of this type of nature, and I think the easiest answer as to how we've responded is it's an emergency, and when things are in an emergency, you work out how to respond at the moment for what is required to survive. So some of those survival instincts really kick in, and because the reality right now is that we're not sure what's going to happen. It's panning out differently around the world. But it's been 2 months, and it's been a time when we've got news and we've got information, we're sort of holding on to that. We're holding on to something which is stable and certain, and then we're trying to make plans around it. And then the next day, something else comes up. And so it means that how we're responding and what we're doing has been necessarily changing and adapting. So I think it's a time of moving from living with certainty to moving to times of uncertainty and a very different way of being. And that means that work and with Social Ventures Australia has necessarily changed. It's been an unusual situation where I haven't been zipping around the country or elsewhere on planes, trains and automobiles. So that's definitely a big shift, moving to working from home. But I think importantly, right across the board, it is that shift in mindset around what we can do and how we do the things that we need to do in the communities we work in. SIMNA and with SVI necessarily moved from a lot of meetings in person. It was all about connection, being in person, and it's moved online. So trying to make that shift, and it's hard because it's not as easy as just packaging up what you did before and popping it into a Zoom meeting. Necessarily, there's different ways of approaching it, different styles of interaction, different skills required. So it's been a huge shift. That shift from the known and what we do, and just keep on doing it and just try to do well, to the unknown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely 100% agree with everything you just said there. It's been a steep learning curve, I think, to move things from in person to online, and how do we still create those connections and that warmth of feeling that you get when you're in a room with people? How do you try and stimulate as best as you can through online conversations? It's difficult, and it's definitely something that we've been grappling with. So yeah, it's nice to know that's a challenge that everybody's facing.
It's a race as well. So one of the, I'm going to say, good things about it is it's showing how we necessarily need to adapt. So this series, for example, this didn't happen before. This is a time when we've come together to sort of explore what is going on and how we're all responding. That wouldn't have happened before. It would have been, oh, that's a good idea. Let's put it on the agenda, and we might get to it at some point later. We balance our priorities and see what we can do. It's like, no, we need to do this now. And I think it's what it's done is sort of raised the sheer volume of different types of activity. But then, I have to say, there's just so much that's out there at the moment. It can be quite overwhelming. So one of the biggest changes across the networks and at work is just trying to keep across the volume of stuff that's out there. It's quite daunting. Quite daunting to know what's meaningful, what's real, what should I focus on. Used to have when it came to news, some shorthand, which was I should only read anything in the news if it was going to be useful in 6 months' time, just to stop the noise of the constant flow of the feeds of information and just the crap. Mm-hmm. And so it's quite hard to take that focus now, given how different the world is or how different the world appears to be each week and where things are going. So I think for me, that's a fundamental shift in how I respond then for the networks and in my work.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, absolutely agree. And your point there about if it's not going to make a difference in 6 months, that's a good mantra to live by. Really, normally, it definitely blocks out a lot of that noise. But now we don't even know what the world's going to look like in 6 months, do we? So actually, oh, sorry, Simon, please carry on.
Oh no, we don't. And I think that's very different. That's a really important different way of existing. Mm-hmm. We have existed wanting to know and knowing what's going on, or at least we had that sense of certainty, and now we don't. So when it comes to the things that matter and the work that we're all trying to do and trying to make sure that the world somehow can change some of the bad things and make them better, change some of the inequality in the world, we need to have a very different line of thought. We sort of knew, okay, we've got an idea and we'll test it, and now it's a very different mindset. We're going to have to wait and see where things go and try to act in this interim period.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that we've seen through the coronavirus is that it's impacting on well-being and inequality in the environment, but also it's shown areas where the inequality and lack of well-being and so on were there as well. It's almost exacerbated what was already there and thrown a spotlight on the situation. How have you seen that? Do you have any examples of that maybe within Australia that the rest of the international community haven't heard of, where thinking has changed or things have been sort of thrown up that maybe people hadn't considered, or maybe things that you may have been considering but hadn't been mainstream thought? Have you seen those sorts of changes at all?
Yeah, I think in line with those opening remarks is because it is such a fundamental shift, we've all had to change dramatically what we do, and in terms of people's lives, having to understand what some of the negative impacts may be of isolation and being at home. So Australia is generally a luckier place where a lot of people are able to self-isolate effectively. But what that means for some sectors, in particular around, for example, domestic violence, family violence, is that there's likely to be more of that happening. And we need to be able to adapt services to be able to try to respond to that, which is very different to what might have been happening before. So that's one sector sort of aware of where there's some fundamental changes that are taking shape right now. But that's true right across, for example, in homelessness services. For a long time, it was a sad reality in Australia that there were still people sleeping rough in the cities, and others who were homeless and couch surfing and just trying to make do with what they could. And in a lot of the CBD areas, there's been some concerted efforts to find places for people sleeping rough in the city to stay in hotel rooms so they can safely isolate. And that's encouraging and amazing that we can, when we want to, be able to make those changes. For a long time as well in Australia, it's just around well-being. There was such a fight for our welfare payments, and sort of if you're out of work and you're getting your welfare payments, there was a fight to bring that up significantly to at least at the minimum poverty level here in Australia. So it was very difficult to live on welfare here in Australia. And all of a sudden, there's been multi-billion-dollar economic stimulus packages that have allowed people to get more cash than what otherwise they would have had beforehand. And it's a huge change for some people. The increase, doubling the amount for some has been quite phenomenal. Still, there's others who have been left out of that. But there's been phenomenal changes that have impacted well-being, both negatively and positively, as a result of what's going on. It's a change, though. So sort of that point up front around the uncertainty. There's a bit of a fear that what may have happened now, some of the better things may shift dramatically in 6 months' time. And I think there's that overarching sadness. There's been a couple of million people in Australia who have lost their jobs, and you're sort of looking at the brink of something like depression level unemployment rates. So sort of the spectre of well-being, or the bad stuff around well-being, if people don't have meaningful work, then all the small good things that might have happened now will pale in comparison to what's happening after. So it's pretty significant. It's pretty fundamental. And I'm reminded from talking to colleagues and others that for most, we haven't seen anything like this in our lifetimes, and not sure what to do. It's why everyone's sort of scrambling for, what can I learn? What can I read? What does it look like? What's your thoughts? What do you think? Particularly around how we consider well-being. And I think you can almost take any part of that equation and sort of delve into it a lot more. There's a lot that's going on at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, from the UK perspective, it sounds quite similar in terms of the stimulus support from the state. I mean, there'd been lots of cuts and so on to the welfare, and now suddenly we've had this multi-billion-dollar scheme from the government, paying 80% of furloughed workers' wages, and that's set to go on till June. But even just in the last couple of days, we've had reports about how the UK government's going to start bringing people back in, and now it's all questions around workers' rights and the well-being of people and the health of people going back to work. But also, can this furlough scheme last any longer than June, and what happens on the 1st of July? What's the situation going to be like? How are people going to economically be? And then all of the fallout from these months of turmoil as well. It's so uncertain for so many people.
Yeah. And it's uncertain for society. I think that's where there's no playbook for any government, any bureaucracy, any department to be able to work through. When things started here in Australia, there were comparisons to the government level, the stimulus package that occurred after the global financial crisis. And within a week, that was blown over multiple times with respect to the sheer volume of money that's flowing from government now to be able to support what's happening at this moment. And then there's the question of how long can that last for? So in Australia, we're at this strange stage of, I think, complacency and with respect to the number of cases and deaths. It's quite phenomenal what's happened in Australia. We are one of the very, very lucky countries. And with the government stimulus packages, things are okay, but we're also staring down what could be some pretty significant changes structurally and right across society, and ultimately well-being soon afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And what you said there just about the abyss, I mean, I think it's absolutely too soon to even be considering what the future might look like. We just don't know. But what would you hope the future could look like after this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's obviously a very difficult one. Given that uncertainty is pervasive, not really sure what's happening next week. Almost looking at how many cases may have happened in certain areas and whether can kids go back to school, what can happen. Sort of puts the focus squarely on the very immediate future and trying to get through. And for those in more vulnerable situations, always trying to deal with of how to get by, how to get by. The thing that's great about now is that it's a reset button. And so the hope for the future is that we can do things differently. There's a chance to stop. There's a chance, at least mentally. I know physically, practically, everything that's happened in my life, it's the exact opposite of that, but it is a mental reset, and it allows us to be able to work out, well, what are the things that we want to build back differently? What are the different things that we want to be able to structure differently in the future? What do we think is important? We can see that when something bad like this happens, we can really rally and make some big changes. What does that mean for our excuses and complacency as a society when we're out of this? So I'm hoping that some of that will continue to come to the fore. In Australia, we had the bushfires, which is in our memories. It's really not that long ago. I could imagine having this conversation and sort of talking about the impact of the bushfires sort of 3-ish months ago. They were next level. They were not normal. It was a sign of a deteriorating climate and a new way that we all need to adjust to changing climate conditions. And many communities right across Australia were destroyed from this. And so this is a chance to take the bushfires, take the pandemic and go, how do we want to structure ourselves? What do we want to do? What the specific things may be, as is before, you could really hone in on anything. You could look at tax reform. You could look at different welfare payments and what we want to be able to support our society with. What we've effectively got now is around the universal basic income. It's just under a different name, or universal survival income. There's different ways of structuring how we allocate resources and money so that we can live with dignity and be as healthy as we can. And particularly in a rich country like Australia, there's immense possibility for that to happen. And then you can delve into different sectors and what this means in terms of the use of technology, different delivery of services, recalibration of salaries. It really can start to become quite a significant mental reset that then moves into some of the practical changes that we can begin to see too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And that mental reset that you've mentioned, I mean, that's something that I've seen a lot of people talking about, and I'm thinking about is actually we've got the time now, maybe not the physical time, but the mental time it's a natural pause that's happening in our lives. It's making us take stock of the situation. It's something that I think maybe for some of us, we've buried our head in the sand and haven't wanted to engage with the things that are happening, or, it's, oh, well, for us in the UK, the bushfires are in Australia, that's awful, but it's not happening on our backyard. And now suddenly, for the whole world, this is happening to them, for them, at them. And you can't look away from that, pretend it's an issue for someone else anymore.
Yeah. And it's a way of thinking about it, which may sound a little morbid, but it's thinking about this as a death. It's a death of a way of life. It's a death of a way of being for a lot of people around the world. And what does it look like as we come out of this? So there's going to be some things that we're going to focus on individually and organisationally. It's like, can my organisation survive? How will I survive with 3 kids in the house in that intense environment? Hopefully schools are open soon. But it means that we're able to recognise that it's a fundamental shift. And I think that language about death can be really helpful, that we can sort of embrace that it is different. It's not going on as usual. So it's not going back to normal. It's not going back to business as usual. It's not even business as unusual. It's just a total reset, because part of us and our way of living, our society, has died. And we need to be able to change that. If we can really take that, it opens up the possibilities. And similar to sort of the philosophy that underlies social value and social return on investment, which is around emergence theory, being able to say, well, let's see what emerges from what we are creating, and listen to what people need, want. Like, if we have that honesty and integrity about it, it means that we can really do something fundamentally different, which could be magnificently better. And that's sort of where I have a lot of hope that lies in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of hope, and I agree with you. A lot of hope is coming. So I do hope that something magnificent. I cannot say that word. Anyway, that much better. So I'm just going to wrap up, and I know there's been a lot of scary moments and uncertainty, and you know, we've spoken a lot about that, but also lots of positive action, and you know, we're seeing how governments, as we've said, quickly protect populations, and at times we have seen the best of humanity and some really inspiring moments of people coming together. So just as a final point from yourself, Simon, is there something that you can share that you've seen or heard of that's made you smile and can give us all watching a bit of hope?
Yeah, look, it was one story that stuck with me. So I was speaking to friend and client who was running a disability focused organisation, and they had to shift what they did. They had camps, retreats, everyone coming together, and they had to shift to being online. And so people with some severe intellectual disabilities and other impairments, and they had an environment where they're online, starting to do some activities every day. And there was one person in particular that I heard about, who she previously didn't really say anything, and now she's at home. She's got the screen, she's got the interaction, and she's become alive and full of interactive life and just vibrancy. And I think that's just it's a reminder that there's so many habits and ideas that we form from the normal and the usual, and in some of these situations, other people who we otherwise would have dismissed or ignored can flourish. And I think that's what's exciting. It's that emergent possibility that comes through in creating different environments and seeing what can happen and trying new things, despite all the gloom around us. Some of those things are really important to hold on to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely story to hear, and yeah, it is true. So many in business is normal and society is normal. So many people have actually been left out and not been able to participate in that because it doesn't work for everybody. And so, was like you say, seeing new things, seeing things that do now work for people that previously it didn't. So that's certainly something that's lovely and brilliant to come out of this, and hopefully we'll see much more of that. And it's going to be, I think, a bit of a trial and error. We're never going to get it perfect first time. It wasn't perfect before, so it doesn't have to be perfect now. But as we go forward, you know, if we just try to do better and build back better is the hashtag that we've been using, isn't it? Then, you know, that hopefully is something positive that can come out of so much death and destruction and pain that this virus has caused for so many millions of people.
Indeed.
All right. Well, Simon, it was absolutely lovely to speak to you today. It's been a real honour to have you on the Social Value Always Matters series. So thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful.